Welcome everyone to another episode with Astrid, your APD. And today I am very excited to have here with me Alyssa Olenic, the Little Liz Fitness, and we are going to talk about running, performance, training, and also pooping in the woods. Who would have thought that we would be speaking about poop today? Talk to me a little bit about why do you do what you do?
Yeah.
Why a PhD? Why running?
Yeah, studying exercise physiology with a research emphasis in like metabolism and sex differences and exercise and postprandial metabolism, like kind of how we respond to meals, exercise, all that stuff. Really love it. And I'm a big exercise nerd. Like I think human physiology and exercise physiology is the coolest thing ever. And I've kind of fell in love with it because I fell in love with sports and fitness. So I did track and cross country and lacrosse and like ran for fun and weightlifted just all the time growing up because I just thought it was really cool that we could use exercise as a way to like improve ourselves for sport at the time. But I've always been obsessed with elite performance. I thought like it fascinated me. And then once I discovered that that was a science and a form of science, it kind of all came together. And so really, you know, I found fitness first and then I kind of fell in love with science by accident is what I say. But I actually fell in love with running first. Running is the mode of fitness that got me into like fitness, I guess, as a whole. When I was like 13, I just started running on my own because that's what normal 13-year-old girls do. So I think a lot of people think of weight training with me, but it was actually running and then weight training. And then I spun back into running. So for those here who don't follow me along, like I said, I played sports. I played lacrosse for 2 years in college. And then after that, I quit and I got really into like powerlifting. And I did a couple powerlifting meets and a strongman competition. I got really into weight training. And then I just took this big like swing back into getting into trail and ultra marathons. And now I've kind of done this thing now where I've been combining strength training with endurance training, which I know in the fitness industry, a lot of people think that's super, super crazy to do, but I love both so much. And I love the outdoors and I love trails and I do love running. But I love strength training so much too. So I've kind of become the weightlifting ultra running girl, I guess, from all that. So I'm a doc student who's obsessed with exercise and apparently just is obsessed with, I kind of experiment with my own fitness is kind of what I'm doing with this all. So I kind of blend together my love of science and movement and my hobbies and what I do for a career.
I used to run a lot before. A few years ago, that was all I did. I was running a lot, but I also was doing a little bit of resistance training, combining, and I think it is trying to find the right balance to match your desires and your passions. But I am really interested to knowing about that. You already mentioned and you have shared your story that you ran 100 kilometers. What was the actual driver for you to wanting to get into a 100K challenge?
To rewind it back a few years, basically, like I grew up running. I did cross country and track. I did a couple Tough Mudders really early on, right after I quit lacrosse when I was like maybe 20. So I had done like a few Tough Mudders that were like 10 to 13 miles kind of thing. And at that time, once I quit college lacrosse, like the most I'd ever done was like road running from like 3 to 10 miles, maybe usually in that 3 to 6 mile range. But then what kind of happened is I got really into powerlifting and it was cool to be strong, but I really did miss being athletic. And what happened is I essentially went out west and went out to Colorado and it kicked my butt. Like we did this hike that I did like last 2 summers ago that I was like, it wasn't even that hard. But I didn't like that feeling. I didn't like being like not good at something because of who I am, but I was like, I knew I was fitter than that. So I wanted to get more into the outdoors, but I knew I needed aerobic fitness for that. So I kind of took a big pivot there a little bit more because I was going on a backpacking trip or whatever that fall. And so after I went on that backpacking trip to Zion, I did it with my friends. I felt so strong. I was carrying a pack. I was climbing up these mountains. I just felt really strong. And I liked that I had the fitness to be able to do that. And so I love fitness and I was starting to love, like in the last few years preceding this, I started to just take outdoor trips and love the outdoors. And so I'd always been fascinated in trail and ultra running. I think a lot of people think I found it because of my boyfriend because he runs ultras, but I actually volunteered at ultra marathons in college because my professor that I did research under was a trail and a road runner. And so I actually volunteered at a couple of them. And I was like, these people are crazy. Like, what the heck is wrong with these people? You run 30 miles in a day, 100 miles like this. I worked at aid station at the 30-mile aid point of Eastern State's 100-miler. And I was like, you people are crazy, but I made them grilled cheeses. And so I had read the books and I knew what it was and I loved human performance. So once I kind of got to that point where I was no longer powerlifting, I got a taste of the outdoors. I was just sick of weight training in college weight rooms. And I just remember this in my master's, I walked in the gym one day and I was like, I can't lift in here anymore. And so I did still lift throughout this process, but I literally went and bought a new pair of road shoes and I signed up for my first half marathon, which was a trail half marathon. And then that summer I went out west and did this hike up Mount Humphreys in Flagstaff, Arizona in US here. And we accidentally took a route that was 30 miles and we ran/hiked it. And I looked at my boyfriend. I was like, is that what it's like to run an ultra? And he's like, pretty much, except for you're trained and there's aid stations. And I was like, okay. So that fall I ran my first 25K. So I like did climb up in distance. And then that next spring, the first semester of my PhD, about 3 years ago, this April, next month, I ran my first 50K. So I did jump up that. And then I did another 50K that fall. And then I did 27 miler, the toughest 50K in the US that May, my first 50 miler. And then last year I decided to go all in on my 100K. So I did a 35 miler leading up to that as part of my training. And then I did my 100 kilometers race in October. And then we did the rim to rim to rim in the Grand Canyon last November. So that's kind of the saga that I took leading into that. So it went from being like laying on a rock, dying, to taking, I did take small jumps in my race training. I started with half marathon, which wasn't that big of a jump for me because I had historically ran to 25K. Then I did a few 50Ks before jumping to the 50-mile distance and then jumping to that 100K and then like the Grand Canyon and stuff.
Now, my question would be, and I think this is very common to say, what is the difference between running just on a normal pavement and changing that to longer distances, but in a trail or in a different terrain?
Yeah, so road running is going to be a lot faster. There's just going to be more leg turnover. You're just going to be, you're going to have a little bit more rebound from the actual ground. There might be hilly, but it's generally just going to be faster, quicker, like you're running or fast walking/running, depending on your pace on it. It's not going to take as long. Trail running depends because you can have flat single track. So single track is like when it's like looks like single length track, but it's very clean and smooth. That's like really fast single track, and those races can be super fast. And then you can have races that are like the 50K that I did May of 2019 that was 35 miles, but it took me 13 hours to do. Where a 35-mile race that I did last year took me like 9 hours to do. And I've done 27 miles. You know what I mean? Like the times are all over the place because the terrain makes a big difference. So the difference is going to be, it's going to depend. So you're going to have the vertical incline. So how much you're going up and down, because you have to be able to climb and you have to be able to catch yourself and have that like your ability to control yourself as you're falling and running downhill. It also, there's a lot, at least in the eastern part of the US, in the Appalachian area where I run a lot, there's a lot of rock gardens, so like the trail will just be rocky or like covered in roots. So it's not like the road where it's nice and smooth. You're going a lot slower, but you're also like ping-ponging between rocks and roots and trying not to trip over things. So you're running, but you're also kind of like jumping. So I think that it's different and it depends. So good ultra runners are good runners, period. And good runners can become good ultra runners. I'm not saying one's better or worse than the other. It's just different. It's specificity of it. I think it requires a lot of power because you're literally powering up mountains sometimes. Like the incline you're getting on some of these runs are just going to be greater than that on road. And a lot of it also is a lot of hiking. And I think some people think that when you say trail or ultra running is hiking, that it's less than. But hard hiking is actually like really hard. And if you get into like terrain, a lot of what I train on here is like you're climbing straight uphill for like half a mile, and like you physically cannot run up it unless you're crazy elite, and you're going as hard as you can, and it's still only like 17, 18, 19, 20 minutes per mile, and like you're sweating and your heart rate's as high as you can get. And I'm more of a middle pack runner, so like of course, you know, that's gonna range. So it really just depends on the trail and the area that you're in, but it can be anywhere from being not that much different from road and you're only like 30 seconds slower to being like twice the pace of your road or 3 times that, and like that's good. So it really just depends on what you're kind of you're facing.
When you're trying to run this kind of like try to create a routine or trying to look for, well, how fast can I run this same terrain on an ongoing basis, what sort of things do you use to measure the consistency of your speed, or whether you're actually improving or just getting better?
Yes,
at that?
Trail can be hard because a lot of people get really hung up on the fact that your pace is constantly changing. We're on road, like I have a running watch, but on road, like I know, okay, like if I'm going like an easy run, my pace is probably going to be this. If I'm doing like a harder effort, this is probably going to be my pace. I can check in on it, and I kind of know what that is, or I can test it. Like I do that with my running programs with people. Like I have them test their paces, so I kind of get an idea of where that's at based off like the goal of the day. But trail trips people up because assuming it's more varying in terrain, your pace is changing constantly. So you might be going super slow up a hill and then super fast down. So your average pace is pretty normal, but you might be super slow looking at your watch going up and then, you know, really clicking it going down, or some people struggle going down, so they're actually even slower. So I like to use RPE a lot to check in with myself. I like to use my relative intensity. So like that's traditional and endurance and strength training. So I'm a really big fan of using that on trail because paces change, but you do, as you continue to trail run, you generally start to know what your paces are on different types of trail. Like you kind of start to learn that. I think a lot of people get worried because they don't know it off the bat, but once you start running similar terrain over and over again, you kind of know where your performance is. And so we'll train a lot on really similar trails all the time because we'll train in these sections in North Georgia that are like the hardest sections, or we'll go to these regions like in North Carolina or Tennessee here in the States where we know the trails. And so if you're training on the same thing over and over, if you're doing a long run on the same like 20-mile section of trail, you know that like if 2 weeks ago you felt like trash, like you were bonking or you were super slow and you didn't have a great run, then you come back and you do it again and it's faster, then like you got better. So it's hard to measure in like that small objective, but you really do have to push the entire time you're out there. Like if you want to get a 6-hour run done of that distance, like you're not just like lollygagging in the woods. Like you're like, okay, I'm getting this done in 6 hours today, but you're also, sometimes it's just like getting time on feet also with trail running. So it's not even trying to improve necessarily pace and distance as much as you're just trying to like get your body used to moving for an extended period of time under fatigue. So there's kind of two different ways to approaching it. But generally, anytime I run the same thing again and I can assess my progress over the course of a training cycle, that's usually, because I'll usually run between 2 to 3 different specific trail sections. And I know if I do one run early on in my training cycle and I go back and do it again, I should be doing it faster. And that's usually how I gauge that progress. So total time it takes, or if it takes the same amount of time, but it destroys me less.
One thing I think it is sometimes a little bit hard is to sort of, how sometimes do you gauge if you're doing better, if you're having better progress, if you're perhaps combining your running with lifting, and whether you're recovering well, and when you try to do this, perhaps you're not well recovered and you could be improving, but you can't really see it because you're exhausted, you're tired, or you're not fueling properly. Mm-hmm. So you get into these trails, you run pretty much the same. You might have improved, but that day you actually sucked and you feel like, am I actually regressing? So how do you go about that?
Yeah, so I'm really big on using your running and your lifting as part of seasons. So like I'll build them both together when I'm prepping for a race, but then it will get to the point where I'm just maintaining my lifting volume at a point that's recoverable, where I'm still either making progress or sustaining what I'm doing. That is the least fatigue on my legs, and that will generally drop off as we go. But that's the thing that people like, I think people have to recognize the difference between like if you are a trail, road, marathoner, ultra runner, 5K runner, whatever you are, and you're just doing lifting to just support yourself because it's good for injury prevention, it's good for muscle bone health, like doing the minimal effective dose, versus what I'm doing where I'm trying to be as strong as I possibly can while running as far as I possibly can. They're two very different things. So for a lot of my clients, they're dropping off volume rapidly during those last 4 or 8 weeks because that's what they can handle. And I give them options within their program what to remove. But to answer your question, I mean, a lot of times people are like, well, what do you do if your legs are just tired or sore? And at some point when you're in a heavy, hard training block, the last like, I want to say before your taper, that last block and a half or so, like you're just tired. It's just hard. You're just fatigued. You're accumulating fatigue. That's just the highest volume, but you're not meant to sustain that year round, right? Like that's your peaking phase. So whenever I train for races, I'll start at like 4 days a week of lifting, and then I'll go to 3. And I'll try to hang on to like my 4 days a week as long as I can. And then once I can't sustain that, then I usually drop it back to 3. And then at the very, very end, I'll drop that back to 2, and then it goes away entirely. So you are adjusting your training and your lifting volume as your running builds, because I like to describe it as a fishbowl. You only have so much water you can take out of your fishbowl, right? And it's either going to go to running or lifting. And the more fitness you have, the higher work capacity or volume tolerance or overall fitness you have, the more you're going to be able to handle. So a beginner is only going to have maybe 8 ounces of water, where like an intermediate person's going to have 10. And like someone who's been doing this for years might have like 12 ounces of water to distribute to things, if that makes sense. And so I do assess it though. I pay attention. Like a big thing that me and my coach, because I had a coach last year, which helped a lot to have a second set of eyes, and we'll look, and if like once my running volume gets high, my squats get slower, because running doesn't interfere with strength and power a little bit more than it does like hypertrophy. And so then he'll know, okay, well, like we're not recovering from this volume, so we need to drop something off. Or like I might drop a lot of that volume, because volume is going to be causing more of that pain and soreness and muscle breakdown than like just touching weights to begin with. So a lot of my strength training towards the ends of my race periods are like low reps, heavy weight, not a ton of volume. Like that's just not the period of time for it. So picking your season, so that way that like you're still able to like maintain strength while not wasting your recovery on like a ton. Like I always joke, like you don't need to be doing bro bicep curls when you're peaking for a race. Like that just, if you want to grow your biceps in your off season, that's great, but that just wasted energy. So you have to pick and choose your battles. So it's like really trying to find that minimal effective volume of maintenance or recovery or whatever aligns with your goals. And then, yeah, a lot of it is just you're sore and you're tired, and you'll deload or you'll taper and you will feel better. But there comes a time where, I mean, if you're trying to do a 5K and lift 2 days a week, it's going to feel a lot different than like me training for 100K and also training for Olympic weightlifting. But at some point in time, just accepting that like this is a goal you have, fatigue comes with high volumes of training. Like if you need a deload week, or like if you need an extra rest day, like take that if you're not recovering, but assessing if it's your mind versus like your legs are not recovering. So that's why like I like the feedback. Like if my lifts are slower, that means that I'm not recovering, or like it's too much. And that's usually like how we know that, you know, we need to adjust things. So hopefully that was straightforward. It's always hard to answer this because there's such a difference in your approach. If you're just like, hey, I'm doing 2 days a week of lifting to just like not have my tendons rip in half while I'm running, versus like, hey, I'm trying to 1 rep max my back squat and also train for this big event.
I'm thinking of someone who is not necessarily running for a particular competition, or someone who is wanting to go into a meet or like getting as strongest as they can, but roughly thinking about some general populations, someone who is just coming and telling you, I love running, it's something that I really love doing, it helps me de-stressing, puts me in a better mood, but I also want to get stronger or just change my body composition. What's the best ratio on utilizing cardio, specifically running, without affecting my performance in my lifting, so I can do better at getting stronger, improving my hypertrophy? Like, what would be the ratio that I could be aiming for that is not going to affect or interfere with these 2 things at the same time?
Yeah, so I don't know if there's an exact ratio, but generally, like if you have a low level of fitness, so if you have someone coming in with like not a high fitness status, they can improve both together for quite some time. So as a beginner, intermediate, until they get to that more elite advanced, that's when specificity will like, you'll either plateau with both or you'll have to focus on just one to improve in it. So for most people, the issue won't be a matter of the interference. Now, this is assuming they're Gen Pop and they're not like, I run 50 miles a week as a marathoner and don't lift at all. Those people, like, I'm probably going to encourage you to say, hey, take an off season or lower your running volume and increase this for a few months. Like, take time investing in strength. But if we're talking just Gen Pop and they're not training for races or anything, I wouldn't worry as much about like their ability to do both together, but time. How much time do they have? Because for most people who come to me who are confused by what I do, their issue is that they either lack fitness or they lack time. So they either just need to invest time just getting generally fit, which both will serve that purpose, or they just need to figure out what fits schedule. So I would say like finding a split that one is enjoyable and adherable to them. And making sure that I would say doing resistance training for most people, I'm going to say like a minimum 2 days a week, but I would encourage people like 3 to 4 is probably like a really good target. So I think for most everyday people, 3 is a really good target of days to resistance train a week. You can make a lot of progress in there until you know, eventually if you train really hard, you're going to reach a point where you like, again, you might have to do more because you might need to do more to be more serious. But for most Gen Pop people, I really like 3 days a week. You can do 3 full body lifts or like a push pull upper. If you're a runner, I always like that because it's like you're doing 2 full bodies like push and pull, but then you're doing the upper body day, so you're not using your lower body 3 days a week. Or you can spread your lower body across the week so it's recoverable, so you're not as sore from that. So utilizing things like that, so you're not just doing like a massive leg day and then being super sore for like 3 days. So either taking your volume and doing like, I like push pull or 2 full days and then an upper. If you really have a hard time with that lower body and you want to be extra recovered, I like push pull upper or full upper for people for that. Or 3 full body days a week are really great. If you are just trying to distribute that volume across the week. And if you're doing an appropriate amount of lifting, that's a great way to get increased frequency. And then you're increasing that stimulus. So they're actually getting kind of like more bang for their buck from that, while also probably not feeling as run down from their lifting, which is important then. And if they want to add in running and they like do it for fun and de-stressing, fitting that in, on 2 or 3 days a week, depending on what they like to do, anywhere from 1 to 3. And it's, if you're doing them on separate days, unless you're doing crazy high volumes, it's probably not going to interfere. The biggest issue will be this time for that. Or if the running is causing them to like be in so much of a calorie deficit that they're not eating enough either like protein to recover from their workouts or carbs or calories. So that's going to probably more so come down to, and you know all this, but like their nutritional intake. So like if they are someone who's trying to put on muscle, but they're not really eating any different and they increase their energy expenditure from cardio, like, well, then they might need to just account for that. But generally, I like that 3 day a week target for people and then fitting in whatever other running is enjoyable for them within that. And for most people, it's not going to be a high enough volume to interfere with what they're doing, especially if it's on separate days. Like, I think in bodybuilding bro culture, they're like, cardio kills gains, don't do it. But really physiologically, is there any difference between them stair stepping for 30 minutes after their lifting session versus you going for a 30-minute jog? Likely not, right? So like it's not enough. I would say until you're getting into the 30 to 40 to 50 mile a week running distances, you can still maintain a good bit of strength and strength training. It's really going to be your time you have and just your ability to recover.
It depends also on the intensity you're running. Like if you're running super hard, it is going to be much more fatiguing and perhaps more deleterious for hypertrophy, as if you just were doing a softer jog where you're just not running very intense and you can still perform appropriately and combine them both together. Now, my question would be, what would you think about putting these two things together when people want to run and perhaps lift the same day? Would you recommend to prioritizing one over the other? Obviously, it will depend on the goals, but different times together, what would be your recommendation? Obviously, it comes down to time as well, but what is potentially more optimal?
Science to this, so don't worry. I'm writing my hybrid ebook, so I've been reviewing all of this stuff for this. And so the biggest issues are going to be the neuromuscular fatigue that endurance has for lifting, because lifting is highly neuromuscular, so you don't want that to happen. But also, endurance depletes our glycogen stores more rapidly than resistance training does. It's just a very glycolytic, very carb-demanding mode of activity. And so some people will say, well, if you do lifting after running, you get the last bout effect, where like the last stimulus your body got is lifting, so it's more likely to implicate those pathways. But it's all pretty mixed. Honestly, I'm a fan of whatever allows you to do the most work, because that's going to be still a greater stimulus. That's my personal approach to this. So I'm a fan of doing lifting first. Because it's more neuromuscular, it's more powerful, it's more demanding. And if you're fatigued for that, you're going to do less total volume. So if you're trying to get the most out of your lifts, like not being pre-fatigued from your endurance training will probably help with that. And then obviously like not depleting your glycogen stores before you go into a lift. So I'm a fan of doing lifting first, especially if you have any strength or fitness goals. Now, if you are someone who is at like the very tail end of a marathon training cycle and you care more about your marathon performance, and the only way you can get lifting in is after you finish your run, you come back home and you have dumbbells or kettlebells or a rack, whatever it is at your house, and then you do your lift because you care more about that, like that's a choice that you're making based off specificity. But like, I'm a fan of doing lifting first and then the running. And I'm also a fan of, if you're going to do it separately, doing your lifting first if you can. Some people prefer to run in the morning though, but then separating it out by like 4 to 8 hours and making sure you're getting like more specific nutrient timing in between. If you're doing it like, where most times like what you eat in a normal day is fine, but if you're trying to do multiple workouts in a day, like really making sure that like you're getting in carbs and protein like right after your workout, because you're going to use that again later. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of lifting first, running second, but if you can't, you know, prioritize what works for you or space them out so you can recover between. That's usually my general recommendation. But of course, at the end of the day, what's optimal isn't always possible. And or like, if you're just like, listen, I just don't care about my gains in the season, I just want my running performance to be the best it is. Like, or it's an off day and you're like, the only way I can get this in is if I run first. And like, oh, you won't die. Like, you're not going to like lose all of your fitness because you didn't do it. You know, optimal versus practical and what's possible. Like sometimes that's better.
You mentioned something very interesting, and it was about nutrient timing. And I am interested in hearing from you. What would you do with, perhaps, do you think carb cycling is something that you consider maybe a tool that is more useful when it comes to recovering and performance? Or do you think that, in your particular opinion, is not something that you find that useful?
I don't think I necessarily will call it carb cycling. I just think that sometimes, like, I don't want to insinuate that you should eat less on lower volume days or rest days. More so, I would say that, like, if you're doing stuff like this, you're probably going to have days where you're going to eat more carbs just by like, you're still going to need sufficient carbs on those other days to recover. But like, for example, my long run days where I'm running for anywhere from 4 to 8 hours, I'm eating more calories on those days. Like, I am eating, you know what I mean? Like, so the days that I have higher volume training, I'm probably by default, by nature, even when I track food, like, I know I'm eating more on those days, but it's not like an intentional cycling thing. It's just like, these are the demands of my body this day, and so I'm going to increase to meet it. But I don't like decrease my carbs on the Sunday after. I still need a decent amount of carbohydrate to replenish my stores. So I think only because people associate carb cycling as a diet manipulation tool for weight loss. And I just don't think that, like, if you're doing high volume training or you have a big specific goal, like, again, like, saving that for your off season, but rather thinking of it as the inverse, like, you're eating at your maintenance needs, and then days you have extra volume, you're doing a little bit more. So like, I know that's technically cycling your carbs or calories, but it's not really intentional. It's just, this is the demands my body needs this day. And so really for me, or in general, like, your carb and calorie intake will probably just like oscillate across the week rather than being consistent. I know people want to always hit specific macro targets, and you can, but like, the days that I'm running 25 miles, I'm housing a pizza when I get home, but I don't do that after like my Tuesday 6 miler. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not what I'm doing.
No, it completely makes sense. And that's what I pretty much was thinking about. It's mostly like your requirements are going to go up when your demands are higher. Yeah. And when you're recovering, perhaps your calorie demand is not as high, but you still need enough fueling to recover to get better for the next day. And that comes on this very controversial topic of, should I lower my calories on the days that I'm not doing anything, or my carbohydrates? What about the days I train? How do you work around your calorie intake? Sometimes you think, if I am not training, could I still roughly eat an adequate amount of calories that aren't necessarily very low, and just making sure that is helping you recover properly for the next lift? What would you think about that?
So I personally just never lower my calories. Like, if I'm in a deficit, like, and I'm trying to lean out, like, I have a lower baseline calories, but I never go like and say, well, I'm not working out today, so I'm going to eat less than my baseline. Like, I'm always just going back to my baseline. And if I have a day where I feel extra hungry or not recovered, I'll increase that. up a little bit and go back to my baseline. Does that answer that question? So I'm not a big fan,
Yeah.
like you're doing a rest. And it depends on your high volume of training, right? So like if you're a recreationally active person who works out 2 days a week and runs once, and you're doing 3 workouts total per week, you probably can eat the same thing every single day and not really worry about it. Or like if you really want to, because you're extra hungry on the days you train, you could eat like extra calories and then go back lower. But like if you're someone who's training like 5 to 10 to 15 hours a week and you have high demands and your resistance training and you're running, I'm not a big fan of like, oh, well, I'm resting, so I should eat less. Like the whole point of like resting is to allow your body to restore and recover, and it's replenishing glycogen stores, and it's doing protein synthesis to recover our muscles from the work that we did. So it's like, it's unfair to our bodies to act like they're doing nothing kind of thing. So again, I still think that like finding that maintenance baseline of what you can return to, so it's adequate fueling, and then if you're extra hungry or you do extra volume or extra work, then increasing from there. Does that answer that?
Yes, yes, no, absolutely.
It's so
now, Mike, another question.
I'm sorry, it's so hard because it's like 2 different populations. You would say 2 different things.
Yes, I agree. I think we're trying to cater for either of them. But because there were some general questions from like Gen Pop, it is good to address those, because there's a good chunk of people that really just are trying to do this on a more recreational manner rather than actually trying to hit specific numbers to get into a competition or something like that.
Most people, I think the easiest thing to do too, because I think, I mean, if you're like a macro counting expert, then sure, oscillate your calories if you really enjoy it. But for most people, I don't know, you work more with nutrition. I'm like, just stick to your macro target, or like range, or like try to hit the protein and carbs that you know you need, and then like see where the rest kind of falls into place. That's the price that I kind of take. For Gen Pop people, I mean, they're probably doing the same volume every day, whether they're lifting or running, so they can probably keep it pretty consistent. But if they really, really love eating extra carbs on training days, like, go ahead and do it. But your needs probably aren't varying that drastically.
When it comes to running, what is your statement or your position when you hear people saying to really enjoy running and do better at running, you should be weighing less?
So how do I say this without getting yelled at on the internet? There's a degree of truth to that isn't necessarily false, but there's also a lot of falsehood to that. So when we think about physics, right? If you're trying to move efficiently and do less work, it's easier to move less weight, but that also tells you nothing about like the energy systems or the training that's within them, right? So like theoretically, you could have 2 people that weigh the same body weight, and one can be a substantially different runner. So it's not the weight dictating that performance, it's the training. But if you're an individual person, to some degree, if you get too small, it can negatively impact your performance, where sometimes being leaner or having less muscle can positively impact your performance. But it also depends on like the mode that you take to get to that smaller size, where gaining weight can improve your performance. So it's one of those things where it's like, it can make you more efficient. But I don't think chasing a size is the right way to approach that. Where like, I'm a very muscular runner. So I would probably, and this is like, I think it's easier to talk about muscle than fat because it can be less of a sensitive topic for some people, but I'm a very muscular runner. I know that I'm a better runner when I weigh less, because even if it's less muscle, because it's less for me to carry around. So some of my best race performance times, I was 15 pounds lighter than I am now. That doesn't mean I'm a bad runner, and that doesn't mean that I can't be that fast again. But muscle is energy costly tissue. And if we're thinking VO2 max and like the amount of oxygen those muscles are consuming to produce energy, then like it's going to be more energy costly for me now, which is okay. And that's something that I'm fine with. But you kind of just have to like find that place where you're comfortable to sit at, and you know, the pros and cons of each. So there's no direct answer, because everyone, 2 people of the same body weight can have totally drastically different performances. So I think a lot of it has to do with the person, the methods they take to get there. And I think that, like, to some degree, when we're talking elite athletes, you know, body composition and body size do impact that, like, good or bad. To, you know, you just have to really,
yeah,
yeah.
Is finding the right balance between your muscle ratio and the body fat you have. Like, too much body fat to carry or too much muscle will impact your performance because you're heavier either way.
Yeah.
And even like having more muscle, as you said before, is going to make you heavier, and it makes you feel like you're slower than you would normally be.
Yeah.
Same perhaps if you're carrying extra body fat. Ideally, do you think it is perhaps a metabolic difference when it comes to performance? Maybe you weigh the same, but the difference is in the body composition. A person is more heavier because of body fat, and the same person is heavier because of the muscle. Would that makes the same effect in the performance when it comes to like your joints or the impacts that you have on the floor when you're stepping, or would be pretty much the same if you have relatively the same training?
Yeah, I don't know if the impact would be different because of the physics and gravity at the same load, but I think the efficiency would be different, and I think that efficiency would depend on how trained that muscle is, right? Because if you take a bodybuilder that's 160 pounds, the runner that's 160 pounds, like, the bodybuilder probably doesn't have very metabolically trained aerobic tissue, so like it's gonna be they're not going to be as efficient as the runner of the same body weight doing the same thing. So I think it has to do with, like, I don't want to say even like quantity, but quality of that muscle tissue, right? Because you can even see that in weightlifters. If you want to pivot to give a better context, you can have two lifters that weigh the exact same, but I'm a lifter with a good aerobic base, and I can recover really quick between my sets, where someone who does like zero conditioning isn't going to be able, they can be just as strong, but they're not going to have that like recovery capacity. So I think it more has to do with the quality, and then also lifting does help make like runners more efficient and like tendons and ligaments stronger. So there is like probably even a sweet spot too where like runners can be not muscular enough, where having some muscle is an athletic advantage to some degree. So it's hard because there's so many like things you can look at, but like at the end of the day, elite bodybuilders aren't on the front ends of marathons. Like that, you can say that.
No.
And they're both phenomenal athletes, right? But they're just different.
Different. Now, let me ask you something about hydration, because I think this is very important as well in terms of like when you're doing very long runs, how important for you is hydrating well and replenishing electrolytes?
Within anything under like 60, 90 minutes, you can drink nothing and water and probably be okay. I think it's funny, water's actually like the most important ergogenic aid when you think about it. But when you're getting into longer, hotter, or like larger running and things like that, it's going to be very important. I don't know I have a hydration post on my page. I don't remember off the top of my head the exact stats on what you're supposed to drink, but you can do like a sweat rate test and see how much you're sweating and drinking that back, and then taking in electrolytes, especially like when you're talking trail running or ultra and distance or long outdoors things, you need to drink constantly. Like I'm drinking, like, I think it's like a liter an hour I try to, or something like that when I'm running. I know like my boyfriend does these things and he has to take so many salt tabs to keep up with his sweat rate and his sweat loss. So it is some trial and error, but I am taking in a lot of electrolytes and a lot of water. And a big thing too is like, one, you want electrolytes in your body because they're helping with like conduction and fluid movement and stuff like that, and hydration. But then also you want to keep yourself hydrated for multiple reasons with performance, but also like as you progress, you do slowly dehydrate, but then your blood volume drops, so then your heart rate has to go up. So you're actually like having it's harder physiologically on you to do the same intensity because of your dehydration. So that's called cardiac drift. So it becomes harder for you, and that happens like, I can feel that when I'm on trail runs. Like I can't even do heart rate training because I like know that my heart rate's like 1,000,000% because I'll get dehydrated, and I'm like, I have to move at this pace to get back in my car by a certain time. But you really want to try to keep up with that like as soon as you can do it, because and the longer you're going, once you become dehydrated, the harder it is to come back from that. But if you're doing like shorter distances and you're doing like little, like anything from 60 minutes to like half marathon distance, you can probably bring like a liter bottle with you, 2 liter maybe at most, and sip on it as you go throughout your course of your run, little sips here and there, and probably be fine.
Tips to find a quick alternative when your outdoor activities or activity run is completely ruined by weather. What would you do in this case?
It depends how ruined the weather is, because sometimes doing stuff in bad weather ends up being a lot of fun.
Okay.
Safety hazard. I mean, I once pulled up to a trailhead and we couldn't even find the trail because there was so much snow and it was so socked in, but eventually we found it and it ended up being one of the most fun days of my life. Some of my favorite trail runs have been when I got poured on in pouring rain and it sucked and it like was not fun, but then you're doing it and it is fun. So I think that sometimes the bad elements can add some fun to it, right? But obviously like safety is a concern. I think it just depends on where you're at. So if you're in a national park town or area, like you can go, there's restaurants, there's usually coffee shops, there's ice cream in any national park town. There's always little cute shops. You could do that. You can find somewhere to sit in a coffee shop and like look at scenic stuff around you. You can drive your car around in the weather as long as it's like, you know, unless it's like icy snow, and like go view searching. I think a lot of people think that in order to enjoy the outdoors, you have to be like doing something epic within them. But like some of my favorite outdoor memories are like me drinking coffee on a ledge in my car. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to be this big epic adventure. So I would challenge it to be like, is the weather really that bad? You know what I mean? Or like, could you go find fun within it with the proper gear or whatever you need, and being safe, keeping safety in mind? Or two, do you just need to scale your impression of what doing something outdoorsy is?
Yeah, or you can just go to the gym or just do a at home or indoor training that day or something like that. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if you ever had, like in your adventures or your runnings, you ever had like a scary moment or like SOS moment that you actually felt like, this is, how am I going to get out of this?
I think a lot of people assume when you say you try an ultra run that like you go out into the woods and you face all this epic danger like all of the time. I do get worried sometimes because the area I'm in is Appalachian region and some of the trails are very accessible and there's like, you know, people kind of that maybe might not always be the safest people. So I'm very cautious about that. Nothing where I'm ever like, oh crap, what am I going to do? The only thing that's really that people do ask me a lot is bears. And I saw my first black bear 2 summers ago. And I apparently Regis sees them all the time when we're running together and I'm just oblivious. So I've probably ran by a lot more black bears than I've realized. But I know they're generally harmless. But I was running in this back, really overgrown trail area in North Carolina. And I've always been scared of seeing a bear and not knowing how my body would respond. And my body literally knew what was happening before I did, because I don't even remember seeing it. I just remember being turned around and walking backwards. Like, I don't even remember seeing it. And then as soon as I turned around, I heard it. And this is the scariest thing I've ever witnessed. Do you know how fast a black bear can run? Like, I knew they could run fast, but that thing ran across this valley and back up the hill. Like, that was scarier than seeing it, was seeing how fast they can move. So that was probably like the only, but literally I startled it and it ran away. So like, I don't know. For the most part, we stay pretty safe. When I went backpacking in Zion 4 years ago, there was a massive snowstorm that we had to hike out of the canyon in, which was like slippery and kind of like, oh crap, but like we were safe and we were fine. So, overall, for the most part, I think I did some maybe dumb stuff that I got lucky on growing up, like in my early years. But for the most part, you know, knock on wood, nothing super bad yet.
Do you ever go running and try like stay overnight somewhere else, like camp, and then you continue running?
So no, usually we'll camp somewhere and like run all of our miles in one single day. So like but that's called fast packing. I'm technically supposed to do a 90-mile fast packing trip this summer. So you'll like run/hike, like really fast hike, like 30 miles and then sleep overnight. So I am planning on doing that. So it's like kind of backpacking and fast hiking / trail running combined into one. So you carry everything on your back, but it's like really light. It's not like as much of a big backpack. And then you sleep overnight and you keep going the next day. So that's called fast packing. So I will be doing that for the first time ever this summer. But for the most part, like anything that's 15 to 30 miles, we'll just do it a day.
How do you plan your food? Because I think this is a very key question that everyone asks all the time. What's the best way to plan and carry food around that not perishable, that you can just very easy grab, or do you actually sit down, have a meal, then continue running, or do you have it on the go? How do you go about that?
Yeah, so when you run races, they have aid stations that will have like legitimate food, like things that sports nutritionally like do not make sense. Like I would never think that you would eat a grill. I have a really sensitive running stomach, so people will like house grilled cheeses and like crazy things at aid stations. So they do have real food at like trail races, especially like my 100-kilometer race. People ate like real food during it, like quesadillas and things like that. I did not. I threw up soup. I tried to eat soup and I threw it up. But for like my general runs and training and things like that, I use packs or like running belts, and I will count out my calories I need for a run. And like I use like sports nutrition gels or chews, like the sports nutrition specific ones. I'll also use like some candy just because like that's always really tasty. I'll do things like applesauce packets, Rice Krispie treats, Cliff Bars, Pop-Tarts, things that have a little bit more fat when you're doing those really long things because you can kind of tolerate a little bit more. And so I'll just count out how many calories or carbs I need. So I usually try to get, and you have to train your gut. So like just don't go into eating as many carbs per hour because you will not be a happy camper. It's going to come out of the top or the bottom. And so I have a free running nutrition calculator like in my bio link people can always access, but usually starting at like that 20 to 30 grams per hour, seeing what you like, tolerate, and then adding from there. I usually recommend to people to try to build up to like that 60 grams per hour. 72 grams per hour is like that sweet spot. There is more data coming out that 90 or up to 120 grams per hour you can do and you can digest and get it in, but it's really, really hard to get that in, and it's really hard to get it in a way that doesn't cause GI distress. So it's really a game of like what you can take in versus your stomach. So it's a lot of trial and error. So what I take in might not be what someone else takes in. So my boyfriend eats like straight Nature Valley bars on his runs or Cliff Bars, where like I can't do that at all. But I will, like before, like we're going to the mountains this week, so I'll count out all my calories that I need, and I usually aim for like 200 to 300 calories an hour, which is usually about like 60 grams of carbs within that. And I'll just try to make sure I eat that every hour and I have that on me. And then I'll usually pack a few extra things just in case something might not, if I'm doing like a really long run, I'm like, well, I don't know what I'll be in the mood for later. So I always bring like emergency stuff that I know I can always eat. So yeah, I count it out. By the time I'm done training at the end of a training cycle and I get really sick of counting out my food, I just throw a bunch of crap in my pack and hope it's enough. And just like a lot of carbs and sugar and just.
Do you ever use fruit or like things that might have a little bit of extra fiber, or do you try to stay away from fiber?
There'll be fruit and stuff at races. I'll do the applesauce packets, but that's probably the extent of what I do. I never eat whole fruit. Some people do dried fruit, and I've done that with like trail mixes. But for the most part, the applesauce packets are about the extent of what I do. But also, it's harder to carry that kind of stuff. I've eaten watermelon and like oranges at races, and that's always really nice. But usually, I mean, sometimes during races, I eat like a trash panda. Like I'm just housing like salt and vinegar chips and like drinking Coke by the cupful and like eating Snickers bars, and like it's just, I'm not trying to eat healthy. There is the one ISSN position stand on ultra running that I read recently. Like there is data that shows like you just start to crave savory stuff because you get so sick of eating sweet stuff. So you like.
Yeah. All right. The pooping question. Yeah. I know this one. I needed to bring this out because quite a few people asked, but also these are situations that you don't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
So I know that you had a post on this that literally you had to put on a statement, please don't send me any pictures or DMs of your poop, please. Tell me a little bit about what to do about it, and especially what sort of things you've come across that you might be able to explain Not perhaps so much in the woods, because you perhaps can be a little bit more intuitive on what to do in there. But perhaps when it comes to running on the road, or these kind of situations that can be a little bit trickier.
Yes. So for those who missed this, last year I do Q&As. I used to do them every week. Now that I do them a little less often, and every single week I would get like obscene, like 5, 10, 15, 20 people a week asking me how to poop in the woods. Like, what do you do if you have to go to the bathroom? Like, just really weird poop questions. And I kept like just being like, guys, like, here's a post, like, and it didn't stop. And it didn't stop. And then I started to get people sending me very weird DMs, and it just became a whole thing. And I just stopped talking about it. I was like, stop it. But I do have a post on my page in detail. So for outdoors, there actually is like a thing called leave no trace. And there's actually rules and etiquette to like pooping in the outdoors. And you're supposed to be like so far off trail, when you're peeing or pooping, you're supposed to be so far off trail, so it's like not on the trail. You're not supposed to like do it so it kills vegetation. You usually should pee on rocks because then it doesn't ruin soil. But for pooping, you're supposed to actually like dig a hole and go inside the hole, and then if you bring anything to clean up with, you're supposed to pack it back out. That's like the respectful thing to do. But I think for most people, like, I would hope that you understand how to just poop in the woods. You just do it. Like, just clean up after yourself and don't be gross. But also, I think people think that this happens a lot more frequently. Like, you're not just like crapping your pants on your runs. Your nutrition is really off if that's an issue. Like, this doesn't really happen that often. This is more of a thing for backpacking. But for road runs, I mean, I plan my routes around bathrooms. That's what I do. I plan my routes around areas that I know that there's a bathroom. And I also generally, like, I would hope that most people, you kind of know your bathroom behaviors around running. Every once in a while, you're going to have a rare incident where you're like, you get the drop. That's what they call it as a runner, where like something doesn't sit well in your stomach, or you have poor timing with your pre-run nutrition. And like, you're like, I need a bathroom right away. But if you're eating pretty normal across your days, day to day, and your sports nutrition is pretty consistent, you should generally have the same response as you always do. You might get that more so if you ate something weird before your run, or you ate like too many carbs too quick, or like something that just didn't digest in your stomach is where it might become more of an issue. But for my advice for that is run somewhere that has a public bathroom, or plan your running routes around bathroom stops. Like, if you know that you're someone who usually has like an issue, or like if you have a 20-miler and you know that you didn't go to the bathroom beforehand and you're gonna have to, like, just plan a route that you know there's 1 or 2 bathrooms, or like a gas station. Gas stations are the jam, coffee shops, like, just depending on where you're at, or parks or whatever it is. So that's my advice for, don't poop in public, please.
All right. The next few ones are going to be about business, and quite a few people were interested in asking on those. So the first one is, what are some tips for growing on social media? What are some of the key things that have helped you to propel your social media growth?
Yeah, so I think, honestly, being myself, leaning into that, not trying to be like anyone else. I know that like seems really silly because you are yourself, but I think people will try so much to replicate people who are already successful, or doing the things that like a large sum of people are successful for, that then they complain that it's too saturated. But it's not saturated if you're yourself, right? Because no one can be you better than you. And I see this a lot when I do get people that copy my things, and I'm like, well, don't try to recreate me. So the biggest thing that was pivotal for me was really being myself and leaning into finding my voice. And you just do that by posting consistently all the time. And it's not going to be like, oh, I'm myself and I'm an overnight success. And you have to keep showing up and doing it over and over, and finding your voice and finding the people that you're talking to. Don't talk to everyone. Like, you're here to ask me about running and lifting because that's what I've become known for, but I'm not talking to triathlete dads, right? Like, when I'm posting, I'm not talking to them. I'm not sharing like, they might follow me and like my content, but I'm not like talking to them. So figure out who you're talking to. Like, get really clear and intentional about how you can help them, the message that you're getting or you're sending, or what you want to be known for, or what people are going to be entertained by following you for. Like, be yourself. And then for growth and stuff like that, I mean, you have to be strategic about the content that you're making, but things that are shareable, like, that's how you're going to get seen. Reels are really big for that right now. It's a really easy way to get more like views on your stuff. But if you post really good content consistently all the time, you know, the people will come. The people that need your message, the people that you can serve, the people that you can help will come. It will be slow at first, but like I always tell people, like, don't feel like if there's only like 500 people there, like if 500 people were in your living room, you'd be like, oh shit, you know what I mean? So like, don't feel like no one's there listening to you. But communicate, comment back, get to know your community, talk to them, because if they learn to trust you and get to know you, they're more likely to refer you and share your content and comment on it and engage on it. And then soon you're growing, but all you're doing is just being on. I mean, authenticity is the biggest pillar of my brand, and I refuse to sway from that. But I think that like some version of that for everyone, because think of how many people that we follow, that we love, that are so different from one another. But when you think about it, just they're posting something that speaks to us and they're being true to themselves, and we love like the message that they have, but they can be so radically different, but also just so much themselves. And that's usually what we connect to people, right? We don't connect to like fake fronts. We connect to humans. So be yourself.
I think even if the message is pretty much the same, we're talking about calories in, calories out, for example, but you have a different way to speak about it versus me, or you use a meme and I use another format of communication.
Yeah.
That is always refreshing to see the information with a different perspective, a different views, yeah, and always being authentic and really honest. I think that really makes you be different and special.
Yeah. I mean, people like value so much that I'm honest and I'm myself. And I'm like, well, it's a lot easier to do that than get on here every day and forget what I pretended I was last week. But on regards to talking about the same thing, I think a lot of people think they can't talk about stuff because everyone else has, but people need to see the same stuff over and over and over again anyway. And you might have a better way, yeah, or a cool way or a different way where like you might make a swipe post, but I might make a reel that share the same message, but they're both valuable and they're both going to reach different people. And like yours might click more for someone and mine might click more for someone. And people need to see the same thing over and over again. I mean, how many people have made a calories in, calories out post and there's still people that aren't getting it? Like, so like, it's obviously like it's not for nothing.
And with that, there was another question that came very frequently, and it's about how can you provide an advice to how you build your affiliations with other companies and create that passive income. How would you go about that?
Yeah, so I think, well, one, it's definitely not passive income. You have to work. It's a lot more work than people think. I always feel really grimy and weird because I feel like you're not allowed to talk about receiving money from affiliateships, even though people know that you are. Like, I just feel like it's so taboo to talk about the fact that you make money on social media. It's such a weird thing. But you do make money from it, but it is work. Like, I think people think that, like, well, I'm a partner, so everyone's going to use my code. Like, you still have to, like, you have to convince people to use your code, like not trick them, but you need to like convey why you like that product and why, like, if they want to try it and so they can support you with your affiliateship. I mean, as you start to grow as a baby influencer, you're going to get 1,000,001 crappy brands. Don't jump on the first brand, like the first CDB keto oil company, skinny detox tea shake thing that reaches out to you. Like you're going to get like 10 of them a week. Like just delete those. Like, it's better to have no brands than to be aligned with something that isn't real to you. So like, the one brand that I work with a lot now, I started working with like 3 years ago, and I was still a baby page and I was super hesitant. And even then, even though I only had like 3,500 followers, I was like, hey, I want to try the product for like a month or so before I'm okay to committing to this, because I knew then and there, like your brand is what you stand for. And if you're aligning with other brands, you want to make sure it's aligning with you. And so I tried the product and I genuinely liked it. And I was like, okay, I feel comfortable recommending this. I feel comfortable sharing this. Like, I feel confident that if someone else uses that, they'll like this, or I know they can get their money back. So like, I don't feel like I'm scamming them. Some people might be better at scamming people online. I'm not. But then, I mean, I didn't have like that many right off the bat. I said no. I mean, I said no to so many supplement companies over the years because I was like, no, this just doesn't align with me. So the whole point of that is don't be eager. They will reach out to you. And this comes back to the same thing of being authentic, sharing. Brands want to work with people that can create human connection and can share good content. That's what brands want to work with. That's why my brands work with me. I'm very successful with the brands that I work with, and I don't even follow all the rules of what they want me to do. I'm just myself, and you know, being yourself works very well. And then be selective. But if you love a product and you use it all the time, tag the brands that you're using. So like, I'm affiliated with 3 brands that I was using before I affiliated with them, because I would just tag them all the time, and they found me and they liked but then they saw my content and they liked it and it was good, and they were like, oh, like, we want to work with her. So there's that. And there are platforms for people to reach out to brands or work with them. They have like affiliate marketing things. I think it depends on if you want to be an influencer or like have a business but then have affiliate partnerships as part of that as a small subset of your income, because like some influencers, like, that is their entire income. For me, it's, I don't know what the percent is, but it's less than 10% of my total income, I guess, maybe even less than 5. So it is nice, but it is a lot of work to increase the revenue from it. Like, you're not like signing up with a brand and then making like thousands of dollars a month, even then. One of my brands made $20 last month. I just like share the coupon with people because I like the stuff, and I'm like, you might like it too. So I would say don't jump on anyone. They'll reach out to you, tag them, engage with their content. And then they'll seek you out if they think you're a good fit. Some of them have applications you can apply for, and then there are platforms for some people to find brands and partnerships and stuff like that. I've never gone into like the ads or anything like that. And then you'll get a lot of like gifted stuff where people will just send you things just to send you them, and then like it's up to you to share it or not if you want to. So there's a couple different ways to go about it. So hopefully that's helpful.
Alyssa, I am so thankful for your time, for coming here and spending this time with me and with us, with everyone who was listening and watching. Is there any future projects you have at the moment?
So I'm right now, which is good, because I thought this was fun, because like people always ask me about lifting and running, but no one ever interviews me on it. They always interview me about like female phys or like metabolism or whatever. So this was a lot of fun. So I am right now working on my hybrid ebook, which is like the science of concurrent training or hybrid training, because I have my lifting programs and my lifting ebook and my running programs, and they do have a little bit of information on how to combine the two. But I think a lot of people, they want either more information or they want to take it to that next level of it. So this will be a guide specific to like, this is the science of like why people say running and lifting interfere. This is how to minimize it. This is how to order your workouts. This is how to approach your weeks. Like, this is how to optimize recovery, because people, I think the hardest thing with that is like balancing the recovery of lifting and running together. So it's literally a resource entirely just to help people like fully understand that. No one else is doing this in the industry. That's another tip. Figure out what no one else is doing and get really good at it. But like that's a joke. But I mean, when I first started my business, I was like, oh wow, all these women that run and lift are coming to me. Why? And it's because no one else was offering it. So I'm really finally leaning into that, and I'm making an ebook that literally teaches you like how to run and lift together, whether you are a runner who needs to add lifting to it, you're like a strength athlete who needs to do a little bit of cardio just because you enjoy it, or you're someone like me who's like trying to be crazy and do both at the same time to maximum. But it's about how to do that, how to approach your weeks, how to approach your seasons, like the recovery, all that stuff. So that I'm really excited about that. It's actually been really, really fun to make. And then besides that, finishing my PhD.
That's awesome. I wish you all the best with that. Hopefully that ends this year. Do you finish this year?
I was supposed to finish this year, but I'm not anymore because of COVID. So I'm still trying to figure out what's going on with my dissertation because of human subject stuff. But we're hopeful it might be able to be okay soon. But I haven't done research in a year, so I've just kind of been like sitting around. I mean, like I've been doing stuff, but yeah. So I will be done next May now, unfortunately. So. Okay. But I should be defending here, so like the light of the tunnel is there.
Alyssa, thank you so much for being here again, and I hope to talk to you very soon.
Yes, thank you. I'm so glad we got to finally do this, and thank you for everyone who joined.